Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, you are watching the Friday Stand-Up meeting with Seth Estrada. I'm your host, Seth Estrada, and I wanted to go over today's Ethereum Core Devs meeting with you. Now, before we roll anything, I want you to know, disclaimer, I am not affiliated with the Ethereum Nate and try to keep Constantinople, the upcoming Constantinople update and fork. But I just want to make it very clear that my stance on the matter is that I am impartial. I'm not paid by anybody who is a stakeholder nor a client, and I'm not an affiliate or employee of any of the individuals or representatives who make their way into this meeting. That said, I am friends with some, and I would like very much to see some of the initiatives proposed come to fruition. All right, let's roll the meeting. Let's see what they have to say.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Everybody, welcome to the call. We're going to go ahead and get started on the agenda. Let's see. The first item is testing. I think Dimitri might not be able to make it here. So what we'll do is we will start with Martin, who might have some updates on other types of testing.
Yes. So we've been doing we got the last fix merged into Parity to run state tests fuzzers, and been doing about 500,000 fuzz tests since then during the last couple of days. We need to work a lot on improving the state test generator, but we have no blockers in terms of the engines and false positives. Yeah, that's about it for now.
Great. Okay, so next we have client updates. Let's just start with Geth.
I guess that will be me again because Peter is on trip somewhere. Yeah, we just made some maintenance releases. Nothing really major to spend a lot of time on in this meeting.
Cool. Anybody from Parity here? Okay, I guess Alfred couldn't make it. Let's go with Aleph.
Hi.
Yeah, that's it.
Cool, thank you. Do we have anyone from Ethereum JS? Do we have anyone from Mana? Okay, I think I got them all. Let me check and see. Do we have anyone from Nethermind? What about Ethereum? We have so many clients now, guys. This is great.
Yeah, I do. PyEVM released a new alpha yesterday called Ada Lovelace, I believe. I don't know the actual particulars of that, but it's definitely getting to the point where if you want to pull it down and give it a shot, it might be worth your time.
Yeah, I just downloaded it and started white syncing it right now, and it's already at 700K.
Nice. Okay, cool. I think that's all for the clients. We can go into eWasm now. Does anyone have an eWasm update?
Hey, Hudson, this is Lane. Yeah, we're very focused on testnet. So we did a public eWasm call, geez, I don't know what day it is anymore, a few days ago. I think it was last week. And we did our first public demo of the testnet and the tooling we have around it. So we have a block explorer, we have this thing called eWasm Studio where people can deploy contracts written in WASP, which is WebAssembly text format. We have a few nodes up and running. It seems to be reasonably stable. You can connect to it using MetaMask. We have a faucet that's working, etc. So yeah, pretty exciting stuff. We're still ironing out some issues and bugs. We've had a couple forks on the testnet, improving the tooling. Yeah, I'm getting ready to release a bunch of documentation and stuff for DevCon. So look for that coming soon.
Great, thank you. Let's do research starting with Casper and Danny, and then with the rest.
Generally, on my front and ETH is clients are beginning to implement, and as we're doing that, we're sorting through subtle little bugs, and then in the spec, and also just beginning to come around on standards like networking and.
Okay, so it bears mentioning that I've already ramped up the speed to about 120% of what it normally would be because these poor individuals get up, some of them very early, some of them in the middle of the night, depending on where they are in the world, in order to make this meeting happen. So, needless to say, they're not always fully awake. So I sped them up just a tiny bit, took some liberties there, and we're going to jump ahead in just a moment also because the part of the Ethereum Core Developers meeting that I was most interested in getting some clarity on today was, well, the Constantinople update, and an update that thankfully Hudson Jameson was very good, has been very good about championing, even though he needs to remain impartial. So again, my hat goes off to Hudson. He's gotten my praise before in the past, and he gets it again today.
Serialization, etc. Vitalik can take it from there.
Can't have Vitalik's
Kind of do a calculation on
Vitalik's mic basically goes to poop because he had a bad connection, so we don't really hear much from him. It's kind of unfortunate. And they go through some of the other stuff.
the middle.
Under some salt and
Any kind of second layer registry.
work that only few people
Developers,
So in,
That's a lot of that which was based on
true, but that really
to get what ends up being
with
support for quite
Or Antonio, anything else?
Okay, also, this is the part where I need to apologize. I actually had this fully edited before I left my studio. I'm at my nephew's first birthday party. Womp womp. But I am enjoying it. Enjoying a little piece of cake here off to the side. You can't see it, but I'm enjoying this. This is why I don't have my webcam turned on. However, I did not I was relying on SneakerNet to bring that edited version with me. So we're going to scrub through this really fast, and you're going to get my thoughts on what was said during the meeting afterwards.
Anybody?
So I agree that, I mean, from the, so one thing though, that
Rust side of things.
Have developers accord.
Rust side of things. So let's reintroduce Miss If and Mr. Def. If y'all want to just give a
What? Miss If and Mr. Def? This is from the development trio, If, Def, Else. And if you're not familiar with If, Def, Else, this development trio, or developer trio, is responsible for creating ProgPow, or Programmatic Proof of Work. If you're not familiar with Programmatic Proof of Work, well, first off, those who are in the know are pretty familiar with it. Those who are not, well, I'm not going to accuse you of living under a rock, because I occasionally live under a rock myself. However, this is what's happening in the GPU crypto mining space in particular. Programmatic Proof of Work leverages the unique hardware differences between GPUs and ASICs, or application-specific integrated circuits. Now, obviously, if you're watching this show, you're probably kind of into this. You probably already have some idea of what those differences are, or rather that there is a difference. You may not know exactly what those differences are, however. And I think what we're going to discover from this conversation with the Ethereum Core developer team is that some misinformation has been going on there as well. You can be somebody who is extremely adept at development, at software development, and at agile development, as they are, being able to coordinate massive sweeping changes to a code base, but still not understand how hardware works. So let's hear what Miss If, and Mr. Def have to say. Mr. Else, of course, was not able to make it to this meeting, but I'm sure he perhaps intended to. But If, Def, Else is the development trio.
quick, any updates on your side for ProgPow? And then we'll go over Paul and whoever else wants to kind of give their impressions based on their benchmarking. And if anyone has any questions for Miss If or Mr. Def, this would be a great time to bring them up if you'll have any questions on them.
Now, before I let you move forward also, Powell was the developer on the core team right here, Powell Bilica, who was responsible for, well, who was tasked with, I should say, testing this new proof of work algorithm for GPUs, ProgPow. Powell, in a Ethereum developer meeting a couple of weeks ago, mentioned that it seemed like it would be onerous if they didn't know they were going to go forward or move forward with actually implementing it. If you may already be aware that Constantinople, the upcoming Constantinople fork, will decrease the miner reward, the miner block reward, from 3 down to 2, a 33% cut in block rewards. And for many GPU miners, this is going to effectively edge them out of competing in that space. It will no longer be a business that makes sense for them. And Powell mentioned, well, since Ethereum, not in so many words, but he expressed maybe some concern about investing a lot of time into it if perhaps it was not going to be implemented.
ProgPow. So we'll start with Miss If and then go Mr. Def.
Great. Put me on the spot, Hudson.
Yep.
Well, as the public knows, not much has changed. The C++ client is fully finished. The Geth client is almost finished. We had a CPU verification slowdown that is now being fixed. And that's really all there is to it. Once we see more interest from the Ethereum development community to adopt ProgPow, then we will have developers accordingly working on all clients. But until that time actually happens, I don't think it's worth wasting the man hours or the money to throw them at a project that most likely would just be ignored.
Now, wow, right? Pretty bold claim there, right? To say that it might not be worth the man hours or any of the effort. To give a little bit of backstory, a little bit of background, there was another project called Bitcoin Interest, a small team of developers with a project called Bitcoin Interest that did implement ProgPow. And Miss If goes into this in detail further on in the Ethereum Core Developer meeting. However, the Bitcoin Interest team and their lead developer took nearly 4 months to implement ProgPow into their code base, kind of proving that it is not a simple task, and it does take many man hours, and it does take real effort and real thought to integrate this proof of work algorithm into a coin that maybe wasn't designed to accommodate it from the ground up, and that it might make more sense to design a coin from the ground up, rather that's the level of work necessary to implement ProgPow. Again, am I a developer? No, I play a guy on YouTube who talks about this stuff, but the evidence is pretty clear that with ProgPow on the Bitcoin Interest team, they had quite a bit of a struggle getting it integrated.
So that's really my statement on the matter. However, I did have a wonderful meeting in person with Nick Johnson, and it's come to my attention that there is a lot of misinformation on how hardware actually works, on how ProgPow is tuned to hardware, and in general how the algorithm remains tuned to a GPU card and sort of balances out the efficiency difference between a GPU and an ASIC. And I believe that misinformation is our fault as if else, because as creators of the algorithm, we need to make sure that we're educating the entirety of the community and the development team on how it works. So I urge you all, if you have questions, very specific questions on how it works, now is the best possible time to ask. We're also available by email at any time. We will be making
the show that members of the community and myself, we did do a ProgPow test on the latest release from NVIDIA, the RTX 2080. In fact, it was a 10-hour-long marathon testing of this new card by Zotac. And there are several other members of the GPU mining community that are interested to see how ProgPow does in the wild. And so when the Bitcoin Interest team released a testnet, several of us decided that a project maintains value. I don't think that Miss If meant any harm by saying that it's an unnoticeable project. I just think that all she meant to say was that right now, it's not a top 100 or a top 50 market cap project. However, it has picked up steam since utilizing this brand new proof of work algorithm.
I think that's really all on my end.
Great. And yeah, just real quick on my part, I have been with Powell communicating with some major, major video card company kind of things, and looking into that a little bit more, and that's shown promise. We'll go next. Mr. Def, if you have any comments, otherwise we can go to questions after that.
I don't really have any additional comments.
Okay. Who wants to start talking about what they've explored ProgPow-wise, or any opinions on that? Paul, did you have anything you wanted to say? Or I think Martin also had looked into it a little bit.
And now before Powell gets a word in here, I hope this doesn't come across as overly rude, but I've got to admit that with Powell's response in the previous developer meetings, he seemed as though he was a little bit concerned about the amount of work that would go into testing ProgPow. And having been somebody who hasn't contributed anything to the code base, but has put in at least a few hours to test a few cards and see how they run with the work that IfDefElse has put in and that the Bitcoin Interest development team has put in, I can say from personal experience that ProgPow works. It's here, and it works on several cards. Now, is it sort of uncharted territory? Yes, it is, but it works, and I've seen it implemented, and I have used it myself, both on the testnet and when BCI, or Bitcoin Interest, went mainnet. So I know it works, I've seen it implemented, and many other miners in the GPU mining community have seen it work because we've tried mining on it.
I have a number of comments. So first of all, I must disagree with the statement that C++ client is almost ready already. So from the code perspective, I tried to use the library it's a fork of ETH hash library, and there's number of issues with this change. Well, first of all, it's just replaced the ETH hash with procpow, so that's not something we can merge because we need both of the algorithm side by side.
Are you talking about prog hash on?
Yes.
On the Git?
Yes.
Oh, I was actually meaning the C++ Ethereum client. That one is what we've done, not prog hash. Sorry.
So what do you mean by this C++?
ifdefl/C++ Ethereum. That was the one that we've completed. Prog hash was more for us to get familiar with the your implementation language, which yes needs to be revisited and addressed.
Okay, so I started with this one. So maybe I skipped that. And I couldn't get any benchmark from prog hash.
So I think what we find in this particular developer conference or developer meeting is that there's a little bit of a disconnect between who was working on which repo, what's been done, and what the current state of the art is, essentially, where the current state of the code base is. And again, with all the respect due to everybody who's frankly donating their time to this effort, because it hasn't been implemented yet and it hasn't necessarily yielded any kind of financial benefit to anybody involved yet. However, also acknowledging that literally everyone that you see on the screen stands to benefit financially from development. Stands to benefit from development on Ethereum and ProgPow when it's implemented in some way. So with all due respect, and that development was taking place on behalf of ProgPow. Again, kudos to the if-def-else trio for working on this. Bummer that Powell just missed the memo that he was not using the right repo.
The only one I got yesterday, it took over 1 second to verify header. There must be something obviously not right. I didn't have time to check it on this level. And I started implementing some pieces of ProgPow myself just to be more familiar with that. And so it's possible I can finish myself this part. I haven't seen any pull request that was submitted to any project I maintain. So that's kind of a bit worrying. I'm not sure if you plan to submit some changes to any of the libraries, or we should take it ourselves.
We have been implementing them and just keeping it on our GitHub repo. We haven't done any pull requests. For sure, we can do that, but I think it would be better to work closely with the client developers, because as our Geth implementation has proven, obviously we are not masters in all these different languages. So we are going to need some assistance. We have development force to basically do grunt work, but we're going to.
Yeah, I'm not worried. It cannot be done, and definitely it's able to be implemented. So one more comment is about the IP itself. So there's so it's actually 2 comments. First of all, the official discussion board is Ethereum Magicians, and I'm mostly posting questions there, and it's usually not very easy way to get response there. Maybe there's wrong way to go, but so in the IP there's many details that are not explained, and it's not so difficult.
Which details, so that I can go?
It's like what pop count is and what CLZ is, and so. For some people it's obvious what it should be, but I think we need a bit more details about how rotation works and so on. It's like if you can rotate by more than the size of that and something like that.
Now, what Powell mentions here is perfectly valid in that it really shouldn't be anticipated that anybody who works in blockchain will also be a hardware development master. In the same way that Miss F mentions, we're not masters. We haven't mastered the domain of every single programming language that all of these other repos are written in. It can't be anticipated that everybody who works on the Ethereum project within this vast network of client developers, that they'll understand how ASIC development or GPU development works. So when Powell expresses some concern at not understanding this, perfectly valid.
Edge cases. So I mostly, to implement ProgPow, I have to actually go to some implementation you did to figure out some details, and EIP is not enough. I mean, it's definitely hard to get the implementation based on EIP only. And the last comment is about Ketchak hash function. So I try to figure out what the parameters of that, and this is kind of exotic construction, let's say that way. And definitely, so I think if I calculated that correctly,
Are you talking about the 32/64 bit shift?
I love that there's a ding there. Let's talk about the Ketchak hash function, and let's talk about Ketchak as an algorithm that has already succumbed to ASIC dominance. We know that the Ketchak hash function is something that has already had an ASIC developed for it. Now, I went off the rails talking about how most of these developers would not know that, but miners have seen it already. In any X11 ASIC, the Ketchak hash function is already developed for, and in upcoming FPGAs, the Ketchak hash function, Ketchak receives an inordinate amount of attention. But it begs the question, why is Ketchak so important within Prog POW? Again, me as a layperson, I can't tell you, but when I hear something come up multiple times, then it starts to sound like Ketchak is, well, it's a desirable target for certain, for this particular algorithm and this particular cycle and this particular changing algorithm. However, it's also understood right now that Ketchak is something that receives a lot of performance boost from FPGAs. I'll repeat that. Ketchak is made trivial by FPGAs compared to GPUs.
Yes, I mean, I did before, but I already moved to the next item on my list.
Okay.
So I'm talking about the Ketchak hash function you used.
Yes.
And so it has permutation of size 800, which is different from SHA-3. And so if I calculated correctly, the output in terms of security bits, some say it's 176. So this is much lower than the one a bit lower than the one we used. And,
yes.
And more to that, it's only 64 bits taken from that anyway. I don't have any cryptographic background, but I want to ask if that is any concern in terms of security and.
Yeah, it's a little public that my identity now and what kind of background I do have in cryptography, but no, it's not a security concern. The specific change from F1600 to F800 was simply because GPUs, they're natively the 32-bit architecture, and F1600 is just twice as long on a GPU. And that actually gives you a nice little speed up with ASICs. Whereas we don't require, we can't consume all of those bits very efficiently. So just reduce the size. It doesn't decrease your security at all. And we can go, actually it's quite public. I can elaborate on that on the EIP. That's a very good point.
So I love that that Miss If goes to great lengths to attempt to educate as publicly as possible right now in terms of changing, as Powell asked, the permutation. And as we've seen with the Equihash algorithm changes from standard Equihash to Zhash or Equihash 1445 and the other variants of Equihash. Sometimes changing the N and K numbers is enough to kind of throw a wrench into the inner workings of an ASIC and put the tip the scales back in favor of GPUs. But it sounds like this particular question right now was more regarding security. So will changing that particular function affect security? I think what we're hearing is a resounding no, but it also begs the question, where are the ASIC designers and cryptographers? If they're not working in blockchain in this way, where are they? Well, we'll come back to that in a minute.
There's been a public study on F1600 versus F800.
So yeah, I'm not worrying about the permutation size.
Okay.
I'm a bit worried about the bit rate, what is called, right? It's quite high comparing to the permutation size because. So yeah, that's all I can say about that from my perspective.
Okay. Yep.
An explanation of that, and also there's no padding to this hash function at all. I mean, So
we
this
can
is
detail
this question is put also in this Ethereum Magician board. So if you can explain that one, I will be happy to have it as a part of EIP.
Sure.
Cool. All right. So yeah, so that sounds good. Does anyone else have comments?
Yeah, so I can add a bit. I have not gone into the same detail as Pavel, but what I've done is I've taken it and implemented it for Geth and done some benchmarks and see how it integrates. Yes, and it turns out it's a very, very simple change, and the verification time about doubles, which is not a big problem in my opinion. So the other day I mined a bit on the CPU, and even on the lowest difficulty, I did a chain which switches over from Hashimoto to ProgPow at block 5, and it takes about a couple of minutes to mine. I know that the first 5 blocks just keeps on ticking very quickly, and then they start to come to ProgPow, and it takes a couple of minutes to mine each block. So that's at the lowest difficulty, which is just an observation, and it doesn't really matter probably other than for generating test chain stuff. So I would have liked to generate a long chain which has multiple epochs. It turns out that's quite difficult to do. From a testing perspective, I have the feeling that if for testing this, we really shouldn't and cannot use the regular testing infrastructure, because this has nothing to do with the EVM semantics. This has nothing to do with the block rewards and the uncles and what have you.
And here, Martin says what he's saying about not testing within Ethereum. It makes a lot of sense. Something that Carter from BBT or BBT Carter has mentioned on one of his live streams is that he'd like to see a proper fork of Ethereum implement ProgPow before Ethereum does, and that in his mind that would be a really great test run of what ProgPow can actually do on an Ethereum flavored blockchain. And I've got to say, the more I look at the problem, the more I agree with Carter.
This is the only thing that's needed for testing are snippets of chains, and the only quirky behavior is if there's at the switchover block, a ProgPow block has uncles which have Hashimoto style proof of work and stuff like that. So I think that, I really think this change could be implemented in parallel with Constantinople. And from a technical perspective, they have nothing to do with each other. From a political point of view, yes, they might be very related. That's about what I had to add. And I can add also that
Now this is heresy. Change proof of work with Constantinople? The gall, Mr. Martin. Change proof of work with Constantinople, but that would give miners a way to keep their GPUs running, even with the decreased block reward. I don't know. We can't have that.
If the technical underpinnings are there, that Pavel thinks this is good, and that people who are in the know deems this to be ASIC resistant, then I think it's a very good change, and I'm for including it as soon as possible.
On the implementation side, Martin, are you able to give us, sorry, you mentioned something about the epoch. Right now you'd prefer to have it, you'd prefer to generate a very, very long chain. Is that correct?
Now, I think I can actually hear Miss If's heart rate going up and her breathing increase and her adrenaline pumping. I think Martin's response was probably unexpected. And again, Martin, thank you so much for suggesting this. I was being cheeky before, but let me just say very clearly, I think Martin's approach is very commonsensical, very no nonsense. And for anybody who is interested in seeing proof of work mining continue with gusto and with real goodwill towards blockchain projects, they need to be able to appease the small to mid-sized miner, not just the large scale miner, because even some mid to large scale miners with a block reward reduction, they will go out of business. They'll functionally go out of business, and we will see even more silicon bleed out into the streets. Where will it go? Probably just to the large, centralized players. That is inevitably what happens.
Would you like us to make a test vector implementation of that?
Yes, please. So that would be minimum 30,000 blocks.
Yeah. So by just to make sure everyone understands, by implementation, in the implementation, ProgPow is meant to change every 25 blocks. This is actually very hard to do because you need a sort of a bridge between the miner and the pool, which would be some sort of stratum implementation. So instead, the next easiest thing to chain it to is per epoch. So this is why it does that. But obviously, it's not very nice for testing. So we can do a test implementation where you can just keep chaining it, but it would definitely don't put that in a production environment. Simply
sorry, I'm not sure if we understood each other. So what I was talking about was a sequence of blocks, RIP encoded blocks that are. Was that what you meant also?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, that's noted. I'll have someone work on that this week.
Thank you.
And we got it down to 9 milliseconds as well. Any assistance with other optimizations that folks might see would be very, very helpful because it is meant to be 8 milliseconds in theory. It's just that Go isn't our strongest language on the development team. So
again, great to hear humility from any developer who just says this is not my forte and this is not my strength. Nobody can know it all. Nobody can be a jack of all trades, as you know. That would cause problems in terms of slipping somewhere with one of them at least. So good on you, Miss If. Thank you for admitting ignorance when necessary. But I think also many of us who know you are surprised that there's any area that maybe you're not well studied on. So, but still appreciate that so many of the developers in this particular Ethereum developer meeting have just been really kept it very real.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think. I'm sure it can be lowered. It can probably be lowered a lot with assembly. But I think the most interesting thing to do is to make sure that all the things that Powell has listed that are required for ProPo adoption, that those things are implemented so that there is support in the mining protocols and the mining software and what have you.
Yep, where I've noted those down, and most of those are either clarity needed in the EIP, clarity needed in the code, and more public reference. So, and also checking the bitrate size versus permutation size and padding, etc. So all of that's been noted and will be done. That's really good feedback. Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah, thanks for coming on and answering some of these questions. Do we have other feedback or questions?
Yeah, I have two more comments. I think Martin meant, so I listed, some time ago, I listed list of changes that are, in my opinion, required to do the switch. And I will try to find it just in a second. So it's something that is outside of the ProgPow implementation itself. So in my opinion, we had to propose also a stratum protocol that would include information of the algorithm is supposed to be used for miners, because there's no information about that there at the moment.
I posted a link there in the chat.
Okay, great. Yeah. So yeah, I don't remember. I think that's the biggest one, and that can be started work on very soon because it's nothing related even to client implementations. And I might find some people that are willing to work on this. So I plan to propose EIP describing this protocol and implement that in ETH miner on the client side. I'm not sure about like on the mining pool side if there's a chance someone will adopt that, but I think EIP is a good starting point for it anyway. Yeah, there was some other changes that, I mean, maybe I'm wrong about some of that, so please take a look there as well, leave some comments, and yeah. And one more thing, so I have some struggle with commenting, especially this level of complicated EIP as ProgPow, because it's not in any kind of review mode anymore. It's merged as a draft, and there is no way to leave a comment at a particular point in the EIP to address some issue. I think it would be much easier to put discussion about single line, instead of having that very much separated on some other media. So that's, I think, as a group, we might considering maybe there's a way to improve that process. For small IPs, I think it works because there's not a lot of lines to comment about. But in this one, I would really like to just pin some comment in particular point to make it also much easier to address by the author.
I think that, yeah, I understand your concern there, and that could be a consideration for changing the EIP process in the future.
Okay, so I'm going to pause this right here, and I'm going to jump back over. I apologize for the very low-tech look of today's event. But I'm going to pause it right here, and I want to talk to you very frankly about what I saw and what I listened to here. What I saw and what I heard in this particular EIP. So not the entire thing, again, to answer some questions from the comment section, not the entire thing was clearly a black screen, but we've gone back to a black screen and we're going to talk about this. I have limited production facilities with me today, but what I saw, and frankly, the rest of this EIP, I know that there are important things being discussed, but so much of the community that I spend my days and my nights with is the GPU crypto mining community. And this push to see ProgPow properly implemented and to see it pushed into a project that has real weight in the world, a project that, that isn't going away anytime soon, a project that has strong market, strong use case, has high utility in the form of the Ethereum virtual machine that has high liquidity, so very easy to transfer. So could you go buy your coffee with Ethereum? Actually, you could. It might not be a terrible experience going and buying your coffee with Ethereum. But then there's also the Ethereum virtual machine. Ethereum is the benchmark. It is the standard in GPU crypto mining and has been for some time now. So to see there be a real push in implementing ProgPow as a proof of work change so that GPU crypto miners can remain competitive in this space, that is everything right now. Ethereum Core Dev team, I appreciate you bringing on Miss If, Mr. Def, and inviting Mr. Else Def compared to what miners are saying with regards to their profits, with regards to their livelihood, which correlates to what you're doing. Nobody works entirely without the profit motive. Whether they're paid on a salary or paid via performance or paid some other way, nobody works without some kind of a profit motive. It's the oldest arrangement in the world. You give me work of some sort that I value, I give you something of value that means something to you. And so many miners are seeing that the value in mining Ethereum is just not there. Take away their competitive edge. All right, that's been the Friday stand-up meeting. My name is Seth Estrada. I appreciate you being subscribed to the R Cryptocurrency YouTube channel, and I appreciate you watching this on whatever platform you're watching it on. If you're not into GPU crypto mining, or if you don't understand what drives a person like me to create media like this, join us on Discord by going to bit.ly/MYB, all uppercase, mind your biz, Discord, or you can ask for a link somewhere in the comments and somebody will provide one for you. Thank you so much for tuning in. I love your face. You're the reason I make these videos, and I will see you in the next one.